everyone for joining me this afternoon. Today, I wanted to give a little bit of information about immersive technology. And so just kind of a brief overview and then some applications of how I'm using some of this in my course. And then just kind of some questions if you're interested in kind of some ways that this can be integrated in coursework. So I wanted to start off with kind of two kind of caveats here before jumping into this. Number one, a lot of what has been talked about in technology has been a lot of AI. It's been AI. That's kind of leapt to the forefront. And I feel like one of the major reasons why AI is kind of here in our face is because we had to be more reactive to that. That was a technology that we knew about. It was out in the wild very quickly, and then was adapted to so many different things just as quickly. And it felt like, from an education point of view, we were very much playing catch up. So it's very much a reactive response to that. We are turning more to be proactive in that, particularly in education, where we're looking at, how are we going to change our classrooms? How can we use this to be more advantageous for us and the student? Because we know that the cat's out of the bag, it's not going anywhere, that sort of thing. So embrace it, right? VR and AR, the two immersive technologies, have been around for quite some time. And it's been more of a productive outlook in terms of moving forward, right? So instead of being reactive, a lot of the education field has been trying to be a lot more proactive. For example, when we closed down across the country in COVID, many professors actually started teaching in VR while they were in a video game themselves. So for example, there's a game called Half-Life Alyx, where you can actually write on a window screen, or just a dirty window or a chalkboard. And that's exactly what a professor was doing. He was using that as his virtual chalkboard, recording that section, and then shipping it out to his students so they could attend lectures. So there's been a lot of people in education really working towards trying to get students and other faculty involved in this because there is such an interesting benefit to this. So that's one. Number two, I've been in education about 20 years that I've been teaching. And I've been to many of these same types of seminars where I was being sold on the latest, greatest thing and all the promises that it's going to do A, B, and C. I'm not here to sell this to you in that fashion. As we all know, with technology, there's a time and place for that, right? In some places, it's more likely to be beneficial. In other places, it's not, right? So I don't want to make it sound like this is going to be that end all. However, with that being said, there is a lot of amazing advantages that I think we have an opportunity to use in using this technology. So one of the things I also think about with this as an emerging technology is, if we think back to maybe when we were in high school or college, things like the internet, that was the newest, greatest thing, right? It didn't take over everybody, and everything, everybody's jobs or whatever, but it is an integral part to our courses now. The ability to start using a calculator in high school, you couldn't use that. Then calculators were easily available for everyone, and now we use them all the time. That's exactly what we expect to see with AI, and the same thing with immersive technologies, is that while there is this learning curve, it's coming around the corner. It's going to be in a lot more everyday kind of life. And as a matter of fact, it actually is, and I'll talk about some of those. Okay, so let's go and get started on this. So that was my preamble to everything. Let's see if my clicker it doesn't want to work with all the new technology stuff connected to it. Actually, nothing wants to work. Interesting. There we go. Maybe it'll work now. Okay. So with immersive technology, there's kind of two facets to this. Immersive technology involves virtual reality and augmented reality. So if you're not familiar with the differences, virtual reality is where you put on some type of headset, and that creates a three-dimensional system or environment all the way around you, so that you have a full 360 range of motion that you're looking around. And so things are just as you are now. Whereas augmented reality is more about overlaying something on top of the real world, right? And so these two different ways of looking at things can have very different and distinct applications. So for example, with the augmented reality that we see here, it's looking at a scan of this engine or whatever this might be, but it overlays that with arrows and identifications on certain things, right? Whereas VR in this image, this individual is actually in a simulation of something. And so these are kind of two interrelated but separate topics, and I'll kind of talk about those separately as we move through that. Okay, so whenever we start looking at a lot of our current education, there's actually a lot coming out about what we're doing with VR and where it's being implemented. So just as an example, what we see here is this is from Stony Brook University as one of our examples that they have in their Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. They already also have VR. We also look at from the National Education Association using virtual reality to support social and emotional learning. We also see that this is being in peer-reviewed journals, that there's a lot of research going into this. So this is from Frontiers in Psychology, the impact of virtual reality on student engagement in a classroom. This is something that very early on in the history of immersive technology that educators have been looking at quite a bit is the benefit to students in that engagement, not only in classroom, but in the acquisition of many, many different skills, okay? We can even see in this one, another journal, the effectiveness of virtual reality on the learning environment. So these are very active areas in education of study, looking at how we're integrating that and how we could potentially use this in our classrooms. This was from the Chronicle of Higher Education. This was published earlier this year, the new academic arms race. And it was a really fascinating article. If you get a chance to read it, definitely do, especially if you're into kind of the more newer technologies, because what they were looking at now is the arms race is not for all the amenities. It's for all of these extra things that we can do to help students along. And one of the quotes that came from this that was really interesting was colleges are really going to have to start looking at these technologies and putting themselves out there or risk being completely left behind. And so this is something that we're seeing. University of Michigan already has degree programs for immersive technology. It's happening that quickly. We're starting to see a lot more development of education applications for this as well, which I'll go over a little bit today. So we can talk about how important this is and all of that, but I really want to get into what is it and how we can actually use it. Right? It's fun to talk about, it's great for students and all this, but how is it great, right? So how can we actually use this? That's always the toughest part to start anything new in technology is, well, where do I begin and what can I even use it for? Because that's the question I get oftentimes when I approach someone about immersive technology is, well, how can I even use that, right? So not really knowing where to start it's kind of important to know where to begin. VR, or really just immersive technology, this is from another peer-reviewed journal, meta-analysis in 2017. VR's essence is captured in 3 pillars, right? We're looking at presence, interactivity, and immersion. And immersion is oftentimes the key word that we hear a lot, and that's kind of encompassed both of our virtual reality and augmented reality is the immersion. Because what we're trying to get here from this is certain skill sets from students. That's all we do, right? In a classroom setting, when we have assignments, we have projects, we're trying to teach and help students with skill sets. For me personally, I'm a professor of biology and environmental science, so I'm very much interested in them being able to identify species, right? Or to go out and take a measurement, or to do something more hands-on, right? That might be a dissection. It might be walking around a tree to understand the different parts and aspects of that tree. It's one thing to look at a photo. It's a completely another thing to go outside and do that. I always try to take my classes out as much as I can when time allows and weather allows. Living in Texas, we know how that is, and when appropriate, of course. And they love it, right? They love a lot of the hands-on stuff. They love getting outside. They love being active and doing something. That is kind of the goal here when we start talking about these technologies, is it may not be the same as going out yet to a tree and looking at it, but there's a lot of skill sets that can still be acquired within these immersive technologies, right? And so some of the things that I think about when I think about the technology of immersive, AR, VR, I like to use the Quest headsets. I'm currently using them to give field trips to my environmental science students. And we actually go to some of those locations that we talk about in class. So rather than them just hearing about the Colorado River, we actually take a tour starting at the Grand Canyon and we trace the Colorado River all the way to Mexico where it dries up because it doesn't reach the ocean anymore. And so being able to see that as we travel along is way more impactful than me just telling them, oh, this dries up. But when they're actually there, they see like, oh, wow, there's a lot of water in the Grand Canyon, but we go down, 100, 200 miles and it's like a quarter of the size. Where'd all that water go, right? So when I think of the advantages, the impacts of a lot of our immersive technologies, these are just a few I won't spend much time on here. For some students, you can actually learn a lot quicker. We had NetEdge, I believe, was here during our symposium. And what they did is they had simulation within the headsets here of driving at the airport. So they were training a lot of these, I forget what their specific title was, but these attendants that were parking baggage and moving all the luggage and stuff around. It's kind of a dangerous job. You're bobbing and weaving all out on the airport and you've got to get from point A to point B. But instead of them learning out in the field, they actually learned virtually using the headsets. And then when they went and took their test, they had already done all the simulations hundreds of times. And so they passed very easily with very little time actually being out on the runway. We see that it can help improve retention again, appropriately depending on the topic that you might be talking about. Safety in the workplace is one I'm going to talk about specifically today. Increased contextual learning, preparedness for workplace or real world examples. The big two that I'm very much interested in are these last two. The application to our distance learning, because we're already seeing a lot of workplace activities and meetings happening virtually. There's actually, for MetaQuest, they have a full workroom that you can go into virtually to do that. And then disability and accommodations is one that I'm very much interested in. As I said before, I like to take my students outside, but there are times when I have students that cannot go outside. If we take a step off the sidewalk, they can't go there. And so one of the things that I'm working on myself is creating 360 videos of these same labs so that students that may not be able to participate in person can go to the VR lab, put on a headset, and they can experience it as if they were actually there. Again, without the activity, but you're still getting that same experience. And that is extremely important in that learning process, okay? We're creatures that not only do we learn by doing, we can learn by watching. That's why I use YouTube for everything, right? To learn how to do something.
Do you have a repository of the videos where it could eventually be where college relations?
Right, that's my goal. The videos that I've made so far, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and so the video quality on YouTube hasn't been that great because they compress files. So I'm working to try to make it so that it's not as compressed. But yeah, that is a goal of mine, is to make sure that we have non-compressed files that's very clear and that we do have a repository so that students can do those exact trips. Yeah, so with the 360 cameras that we have, I need to get a little bit more literate with them because I'm not sure if I'm doing something, if it's user error or if it's YouTube compression error. on there that's making them not great quality, but that is a goal, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about a few things here. Where do we begin in education? How do we use this technology? Okay, so I want to talk about a few things just to kind of get us going. Right now, for VR headsets, right? If you're putting on, you know, an Oculus or something, there's kind of two big players. There's MetaQuest headsets and there's Apple. Currently, the one that is kind of doing the most, that's in most people's hands, are the MetaQuest headsets. MetaQuest headsets are coming down in price right now. The newest release of a slimmer model is at $299, which is one of the lower prices with amazing quality for that price. Mark Zuckerberg has lost a lot of money, I think, on some of this, but he's very much into getting this out. And so at that price point, I suspect we're going to see a lot more of these headsets out. Apple's headset, while phenomenal, is very, very expensive. So my experience has mainly been with the Quest headsets. I've had all three iterations, so I'm quite familiar with them. But the two at the bottom here are more of some augmented reality resources that I'm more familiar with. So this is one that we have here at Lone Star called Adobe Aero, and it is it's in beta right now, but at their last conference, they actually used this for all the attendees. So this will be rolling out of beta, hopefully by the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. But Adobe, as we all know, is a pretty good product. They always put out stuff that stays around, unlike somebody, Google, who always cancels stuff. And then another one that I've started using with some success, but some hiccups along the way, is called Halo AR. Halo AR is an app in which you can upload your models. You create some QR codes. Both of these right now are run off of QR codes. And when you scan it, it will then overlay that scan, that QR code, with a video or a 3D model, whatever it is that you put up there. Adobe Aero is very much the same thing, just a lot more stable. With Adobe Aero, what we're expecting to see is a lot of the assets that Adobe suites already have will be moving into this as well. Okay, so let me just kind of talk about these and kind of how we might look at these as a use case. Okay, so for the headsets, Meta and Apple, the goal in a lot of our education is for more hands-on. We want students to be able to go do something. By putting on these headsets, they're able to move into a three-dimensional environment, whether that's a video game or a simulation, and they're actually able to interact with many of the objects, right? And so being able to do that interaction is extremely important. What I was able to do was just a few days ago, I went to the App Store for MetaQuest, and I simply typed in education just to see what would pop up. There are other places that you can find applications for education. Right now, this is probably one of the easiest to grab because it's on the store already. But just to give you an example, this is a little science and education, the homeschooling update. So we're actually seeing that this is being recommended, some of these labs, that homeschoolers who may not be able to go and order sulfuric acid at the concentrations required for a certain chemistry experiment can actually do this virtually. Another VR lab, this one is a dinosaur museum. This one is actually about running these anesthesia machines. We've got another one that's more of a game / simulation, but it's an auto mechanic. So it teaches like different parts of the engine, how to fix it, that sort of thing. But it's very much of a hands-on scenario. Where I have seen this work out pretty well are LifePath. So just last year, LifePath was able to sit in on the net edge and do the driving simulation. I also know that they did another app where they were speaking to another avatar. Although it was automated, it was still helping them overcome some of that public speaking. And there's actually quite a bit of public speaking apps on here. You can even, if you're funny enough, go into the Horizons world and be a stand-up comedian. They have a live comedy show that you go in as your avatar and you speak and you talk. You get your 15 minutes. It's really kind of amazing the things that they have there that you can go and do. The other thing that is so much fun, and my daughter loves this, it's called Vacation Simulator or Job Simulator. And during the job simulator, you're serving robots. So that's nice. It's fun. It's not another person, but they order like coffee. So you learn how to make coffee in the coffee machine, or you learn how to make bacon or tea or whatever. Even though it's a game, there's actually a lot of value in learning like how to do this. And so once you get past that, I joke, there's actually another app that teaches you how to cook, like with recipes and everything. And it starts you like, here's the ingredients, go. And you're like, okay, so
Like Ratatouille.
you have to, yeah, it really is. So you're mixing and pouring and cooking, and don't overcook it or it'll burn. And so you can afford kitchen fires without burning down your kitchen. Anatomy VR is another big one. This one's the Construct. I clicked this one. This is looking at construction and hazards. And so I wanted to bring this back around to workforce because I think this is a major area for workforce. Occupational safety health. This is a complete app that goes through the training. I did one of these. The one that I did was electrical safety. And if you go up to this electrical panel and you mess up, like it fries you. Not in real life, obviously, but it fries you and you're like, you got to start over. Like you made that mistake. So you're allowed to make these mistakes in these simulations with little consequence other than maybe a bad grade if your instructor's watching. But it teaches you the different processes that you might need to go through so that when you're actually presented with that thing, you then have a little bit more confidence in what you're doing. And so this is that immersive aspect where doing something, acquiring that skill is extremely beneficial, especially in a low stakes environment. This is another safety training. This one's a dump truck safety. I've been previewing one that is a dissection for my students. So in biology, you know, we usually try to dissect something. Many students like doing that. Many don't like doing that. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to really mess with it. I get it. That's fine. But now we can do that virtually, still get the same skill set, understanding of placement of organs, what they might look like without the goo and all of the, and in my mind, I'm like, without the waste, right? We don't have to raise all these frogs anymore just to dissect them. We don't have, we just have it virtually and you can do it more than once, right? You just can't do all the weird surgery that some kids really like to do where they're like, let me just cut this out, right? Can't do that. So these are just kind of a handful of apps that you might use in a virtual world. And that's the thing with these, you really are in that world. So when you look around, you are in this room, right? And you're having to manage this fuse system. So you may have to go get a tool that's around the corner. Oh, you went to go get the tool, but you left it open. Wrong. You're not supposed to leave the panel open. So it's a lot of this kind of training that's involved without, you know, having to spend hours and hours within that system. All right. What does this say? Does anyone know? If you were out and about, how would you read this if you did not know the language?
Show off, Isabel.
You use your phone, right? What do you, Google Lens, right?
Yeah.
That's augmented reality. You're already using it. When you click translate and you highlight it to something, it overlays the actual words to what it means. And so when you travel, you're using, if you use something like Lens to translate, you're already using augmented reality. And that's what I said earlier on, we're actually using and incorporating a lot of this technology. We just may not recognize it just yet. I use this all the time in my travels. Or if I'm in, you know, my daughter loves anime, so we'll go to some of the anime shops and there'll be foods and I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I'll scan it. I'm like, that sounds delicious. Let's get that, you know? So I always want to check my ingredients, but Snapchat, all the filters, That's augmented reality. That's exactly what that is. And we've had that for quite some time. And now they're getting really good. Some of them are amazing in like what they do and change and all that stuff. Google Lens, if you're a Pokemon Go fan, right? I've been using Pokemon Go for that's augmented reality as well, especially whenever you flip it over and you can see the world around you. Amazon, how many of you have used place this item? Like if you're buying something, if
I
you're,
use it for price checking.
oh yeah,
That you can just scan any like
yeah,
the item and it'll do these little dots, the AR thingy, and then it'll tell you what it costs in Amazon.
right.
So I can price compare if
I
I should get
see.
it in a store or if I should order it.
I need to get that one. Yeah, I need to do
Yeah,
that. For Amazon, I've used the places, I think it's places item. So if you're buying a lamp, you can say, see it in my room, and it will throw it down on your table and you can be like, oh, that's an ugly lamp. I don't want that, you know? So that's augmented reality. We're using that already, right? And so in my class, what I've started trying to develop, I went too far. It is using Adobe Aero. I created a lab for my students for biology. So we have the specimens in our laboratory. I've got them on my side table. So when we're in lab, we have an opportunity to go over it. They can go touch it. They can check it out. But if they're at home and they want to study more, if they want to look back at that item, they can take a photo with their phone. Or with my lab list, I can also cast that using Adobe Aero. And so just as an example, and I know if you're watching this at a later time or right now, this may not seem as cool to you. But for example, this right here I've got is a set of hearts. So I'm going to load this up and it's going to look for a flat spot and I can put that there. And so now I can move the heart where I want it, but now I can walk up to this and look at that. I'm using this augmented reality of these hearts in order to, there we go, to look at it. Another one that I did just for fun, someone had scanned a hospital, the room, so a complete room of hospital. And so I was able to grab that one. And so now, whenever you're using this tablet, it looks like you're looking into that space, right? So you can look around into that hospital as if you were there. So you can flip this around. I can walk through and be like, okay, you know, this is the placement of these items pre-surgery, right? Or post-op when you got to come in and clean up. This is what what everything should be placed, right? So that person doesn't even have to be in that room to learn the placement. They can just do this. They can walk through that area and be there and learn that placement. So for my students, they have a virtual 3D lab that I give them. So there's a couple parasites that they're not as gross as the slides that people look at. It's just a drawing. So like, okay, I can manage the drawing, but when I look at it, it creeps me out. So that makes it a little bit easier. But by having these augmented reality assets available, this was so easy to put together. I mean, it's the workflow to this is drag and drop. Like it's literally there now where you can drag it, drop it, punch out a QR code for it, and students can scan it on their phones, and then they can do the same thing that you just saw me do. So the rollout of this is actually very, very simple. So the applications of this in education just run the gamut. There is apps in VR, one called Maestro, that it's very much like a Guitar Hero type game or Beat Saber, but it's using your hands and you're conducting orchestras and you have to conduct on the beat. You have to hit your points to call in the horns or to silence them, and you get points for that. So it's teaching, you know, different orchestral conducting skills, but yet it's a game, right? There's a couple for math, and that's one that everyone's like, oh, there'll never be one for math. No, but there is. In math, where you start plotting out, it starts showing you the 3D graph, so you can actually go in and kind of manipulate that. So there's all kinds of different low-level entry points. For me, as I said before, the way that I do this is I have for one of my courses, I do a field trip. I use the app Wander in the VR headset. And as I said before, I took them along the Colorado River, but I also take them to places like Africa. We go to Namibia, and we also go to Kenya in sub-Saharan Africa. And we look at the coastlines. We look at the different cities. We talk about low-income versus high-income cities in those areas. Where else did I take them? I took them to the Houston Ship Channel to show them like all the industry that's going on down there. So we can go to these places very quickly and easily and still talk about them and see the same thing together. In my biology course, I have two that I use. I use my AR that I just talked about where I might use models, but then there's also some great documentaries that are not 360, they're 180, but they're 3D 180. And so it's a lot of fun to watch students choose the David Attenborough about spiders when they know they have a slight fear of spiders, and that one drops right beside them and they move their head for a second. They're like, okay, it's not real. But that immersiveness is something that they remember quite a bit. And, it's like when you go to a movie and you're like, that was amazing. This is kind of that same impact that we're starting to see on these students. And they're like, that was fun. And I'm like, that's great. I'm glad you had a good time, but what did you acquire after that? So there's a lot of very easy entry points in many of these. And I think that's where we're at currently with AI, is looking for the entry points for not only us, but for students in our classrooms with it. But VR and AR has kind of been in the background, and I'm hoping that we're about to see that start moving forward a lot more because the entry points for those are very, very low, especially with AR. The development of some of these assets cost me just 30 minutes to make because we already had a lot of that software. So that's my spiel for you. Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
Has it ever happened to your students having motion sickness?
In the apps that I currently use, no. I had one student that had the headset on that they said, I don't feel great. And I thought it was motion sickness. So I had them sit down. And then I was just kind of asking, well, are you okay? They had the headset on too tight. And so I thought it might have been motion sickness. And they were like, "Guys, just too tight on my head. And I just don't like it." I'm like, okay, I could have fixed that, but that's okay. But some of the applications can give motion sickness depending on what they are. Because I've been on a few that I'm like a roller coaster. And unfortunately, some of my students, that was their very first experience in VR was the Epic roller coaster. And they're very hesitant to get in. I'm like, look, I know the exact app. This is not like that. Just try it. If you want to sit down, you'll be fine. If you want to take it off, you can take it off. But by far, almost all my students don't have an issue with something like Wander. I'm not dropped them into anything else crazy yet, but maybe I'll do a study on that. Like, just go do it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.